Hello everybody, my name is Brian O'Haron. The name of this particular program is Planning for Success, and I hope over the next weeks to talk a bit about how to run the town like a business and using the town as an example of the business, and try to point out some ways that we can improve on this. They're my ideas or my views. I've done this for a living, and I can help a lot. As I said in previous programs, if people don't listen or don't want to listen or don't want to do anything, that's their prerogative. This is just kind of like a course. Sometimes it takes you 20 years to realize you learned something from a certain person 20 years ago. And a lot of people, when I was out running big programs and companies, used to say to me, Brian, this is terrible. We don't like being here. And I said, oh, well, maybe in 25 years you'll write me a letter and invite me to the reunion. And guess what? I get invited to a lot of reunions, and when I go to reunions, they always say, boy, that was a wonderful time we had back there. Didn't look so great at the time, but we were successful. We contributed a lot to society and to the community, and we're very, very happy. Okay, so tonight you'll see with me, I said I wasn't going to have any guests on this program, but tonight I have a very, very famous guest. His name is William H. Batchelor, and he's here for a specific reason, which I'll discuss during the show. He's been dead now about 100 years. He died at the age of 70. I'm 70, so I'm a little queasy about that. But anyway, he was a wonderful man for the town of Winsted in the area of Winchester, and I want to talk a bit about him if we get time towards the end of the program. I cut out the music tonight because we got a jam-packed program. I'm going to go pretty speedily through it all, and then if anybody wants to go into more detail, they can either contact me by mail or by email. And I'll be happy to either meet with them or do whatever we can to help. Now, I'd like to thank everybody for the feedback I got in the last week. It's been unbelievable. Some think people pointed out mistakes in my slides, mistakes in my presentation. I'll fix those as we go along tonight. My view is to get information out to as many people as possible. Sometimes it won't be totally right because I have to get it out from people who are very busy and don't have a lot of time to spend with me, and it isn't always written down in an easy way. So there will be some glitches from time to time. I guarantee you, though, that we're interested in the facts, and when people point out problems or errors, we'll fix them. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. Okay, I want to say that this, I hope, is going to be a positive show, and we're not going to be talking about people or naming names or pointing the finger at anybody. We're just going to try to talk about philosophy and an approach and a way of doing things in a positive manner. And I want you to know that I'm a very positive person, have been all my life, and I always look at things as though the glass is half full, not half empty. So all tonight I'm going to be looking at things, and throughout the programs, the glass is half full, and there is a future for Winsted. It's a good future, it's a bright future, and if you don't have that thought process, it'll never be bright. So you have to have a positive attitude, and you have to approach things in a positive manner. Tonight we're going to do Chapter 2, and if we can cut to this slide I have here, I'd said at the end of the last week's show, I would identify the problem, which I think I did last week, and we'll talk a bit about that. But basically the problem is, for the last 10 years, we've been breaking even as a town. We haven't made money. We haven't lost money. We've been breaking even. We might have lost money if you consider that we have a lot of problems that have been around for 20 or 30 years that we haven't fixed, like the maintenance problems we've been discussing with the bond issue. Now, this program isn't about the bond issue. Matter of fact, I'll be glad when we're past that and we can talk more about how to run a business. But today I'm going to go into this number 2 on here, which is to give you a proposed required solution. So how we can get the town to be profitable. And when I say profitable, I don't mean a profit like in a normal company. This is a nonprofit company, but money that we can take and put aside. As I said in my green papers a year and a half ago, which you can get a copy of down at the town clerk's office, put aside for a rainy day, like when we need a new fire truck, a new police car, a new, not police car, because Henry told me that's probably not a good thing to have a fund for, but a new building for the firemen, a new building for the policemen, a new school building, fix up the buildings along Main Street. One of these shows, I'll get into those when we go into management by objectives, because that's what the green paper is. That's management by objectives that I jumped into, and without explaining the concept to everybody, because we didn't have time then. But I'm going to do that now. So this is what I call Chapter 2. Now, you can change these slides. I'm going to put up now the agenda. The agenda for today, I always like to put the agenda up in case anybody wants to leave early or they want to stay later and see what's something later on the agenda. You can always get a copy of the tape from me. You can't get it down here, but you can come down and watch it, I guess, or you can, if you want to watch it, you can get it from me. But the agenda for today is just an update on the probable 41.2 million bond issue and what the probable tax repercussions might be. Now, that I'm going to try to get into less each week. I think this is the last week I'm going to talk about it in any kind of detail. Next week I'll just say, well, here's where we stand. Unless some big things happen during the week, then we'll have to discuss it. We do talk about this on other shows that I attend, but none of them we don't go into detail because they have other issues to talk about, and I'm usually get about 5 or 10 minutes, and that's about it. That's why I set up this program, so I could spend an hour going into more detail than we do on the other programs. The next thing I'm going to talk about is what I think the solution should be from my experience in the past. Not everybody will agree with it, but we'll go through it logically and mathematically. And it's not a political problem here. This is a finance problem, a business problem, and we'll take you through that. And then I'm going to talk about sinking funds in the town of Winchester. And they've been around for a long, long time, and that's one of the reasons why my friend Mr. William H. Batchelor is here today, because he set up a sinking fund in 1906 for the town of Winchester, which still exists to this day. It's called the Winchester Sinking Fund. We'll talk a bit about, if we get enough time, we'll talk about that at the end of the program. And then I'll just give you a brief idea of what we're going to be talking about next week. The first thing I want to go over is an update. I just turned to stand. I hope that doesn't goof things up. It's a little tricky for me, but okay. The first thing we want to talk about is the percentage. Last week I had 18% up, and I said I would go away and look more at the reval side of things. I got some nice calls and emails from people that said, Brian, it's a little confusing. It's a little hard to read this, so I broke it up, and I'm giving a different presentation, which I'll explain now as rapidly as I can. I put down 14% before revaluation. That are the numbers which I'll show you on the next slide. And they were on there last time, but I have changed those a bit in that I raised the proposed bond from 2.2 mils to 2.67. And the reason I did that was because in the bond package, they had two different sets of numbers. They had one that came out to 2.67 and one that came out to something like 2.9 something if it was a normal bond release. But I'm taking them at their word that they have a secret way of doing this bond package that is in all the documentation that gets us a lower interest rate and a lower amount to pay back each year. So I put in the lower amount here. If it turns out not to be that, it's higher, or we'll change it as soon as we get the official information from the people. Then what I did for after revaluation, I gave up trying to explain it. I got a couple things I want to say about that, because it's almost impossible to explain how the reval is going to affect everybody in the following year. So what I did here is I just say after reval, it's going to be the 14% that I have here, and that's, and that's plus or minus a little bit. We don't know the exact numbers there; they're estimates. And then we're going to say plus what I call the reval component, and that is the percent changed caused by revaluation and associated mill rate change. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So the RE is a revaluation effect. Nobody can tell you what that is. Henry Centrella can't tell you what it is. Nobody can until we get a certain set of information. So I'm going to leave that more or less to figure out at a later time. We're going to be now putting up this slide, which is the breakdown, same as it was the last two programs. I did change the proposed bond from 2 to 2.67. Now you can see before reval, it's still 14%. The 2006 bond is about 1 mil, which is 3%. That's going to happen for sure. The expense, unless somebody's got some trick up their sleeve that we don't know about, the expense budget will probably be at least 1 mil. Maybe it could be less, a little more. That's about 3%. And then the proposed bond, 2.67 is what's in the bond package. I use the most optimistic number there, not the most pessimistic number. And so that's about 8%. So we've got 14%. After revaluation, we will then be able to tell how much it affects our total taxes for next year. Now I'm going to explain the revaluation effect that I mentioned on the slide, just so you can see. The revaluation effect is a formula for calculating property taxes. The formula is written here. It's appraised value times 70%, which is 0.70, equals assessed value, and the assessed value times the mill rate equals the new tax amount. And when I say the mill rate, that's the new mill rate for next year, 2008, 2009, and the new assessed values after the reval for each of the properties in town. So it's really hard until after reval to know what those numbers are. Matter of fact, it's impossible. So I did an example here, which I won't go into now, for a house that's today worth $100,000 and the appraised value next year going up to $150,000. I just did a little example so people could get an idea of how it's calculated. If anybody wants a copy of this example, rather than go through it here, send me a note. I'll send you a copy of it. I'll come talk to you, take you through it. I've already done it with a lot of people because I can tell you I get stopped a lot on the street. The next point I want to make, and I'm putting up another slide. I have to give the cue to the slide man, and that is this is the status for this 41.9 bond package status. It's presently with the bond counsel and other outside consultants for review. They reviewed it with the state, I guess. I saw some articles about it. They're reviewing it with the bond counsel and Mr. Dix and people like that, and I don't know who, but they're all going to give their input. And then once that's done, then it will go to the Board of Selectmen for review and approval. At a special meeting, if desired, I'm told they can do a special meeting, or at one of the regular board meetings. And the regular board meetings are October 1st, October 15th, and November 5th. Once approved by the Board of Selectmen, an advertisement must be placed in the newspaper. It usually goes in almost the last page of the Waterbury Republican somewhere, the legal notices, which most people don't even look at. But anyway, it goes in there, and there will be articles in the paper. This is a very well looked at thing. So there'll be articles in the paper, there'll be announcements, and I'll be telling you each week here where we stand. So then it will go to the public meeting. It has to be announced for a public meeting, and the public meeting has to happen within 30 days or less. Now, the less could be anything. Nobody could tell me what the legal thing is. So somewhere, it can't be later than 30 days, but it could be less. So that means, hey, maybe there is a chance to get it in before the election. I don't know. I can't figure this math out here. But at the public meeting, it can be sent to a town referendum. I say can, but it can be sent to a town referendum within not less than 21 days after the public meeting, or more than 45 days, where it will be voted on by the taxpayers. I'm told this information from Town Hall, and it's the best information I have available to me. If it's not right, and somebody can tell me better numbers and better dates, I'll put it up and let you know. Otherwise, that's kind of what I have to work with. The next thing I want to point out is that because it's so difficult to calculate the mill rate for the following year, I'm going to put up what I call my impossible slide. I got a new slide up here. The impossible slide says it's impossible now to calculate the mill rate for 08 and 09 after revaluation. And what you need to do to calculate the mill rate is you need the net amount to be raised by taxes in 08 and 09. You have to know that. This year, it was $20 million in a change. And that's how we calculated the mill rate. We took the $20 million and we divided it by the net grand list, 588,080,000, roughly in that neighborhood. And we got the new mill rate, which was 34.26. So that's what our mill rate is. So we need to know the net amount to be raised by taxes. We won't know that till the budget's approved by referendum next year. We'll have a pretty good idea when it's up near the referendum. Until it's approved, might take 7, might take 1 referendums. The next is you have to know the net grand list for next year. You have to know how much the revaluation's done, how much is all the total of all the assessed property in town, so we can use that. And then you have to, the reason you need the net grand list is because you got to divide it into the net amount to be raised by taxes. And then you also need the budget figures, because even though technically when you do a reval, the valuation of the property goes up or down. I mean, it's been going up in the last 10 years, and it'll probably go up this time quite a bit because values of houses have increased for one reason or another over the last 5 years. So we're expecting it to go up. But then what they do in the city hall is, or town hall, is they drop the mill rate accordingly. So theoretically, and I've got some nice feedback on this from people, and I talked to Mr. Centrell about it, theoretically, for the average taxpayer, it's a zero, okay? But if the budget goes up, then the taxes will go up for that. Now, we've already said probably the budget might go up 14%. Well, it could go up 16% or 18%, or it could go up 12% or 10%. We'll know that better when we see all the information in the figures. So what I'm saying, and I'm just looking from a financial viewpoint here now, people want to understand that. If they want to call me not so smart, then they have to do it with this information. Again, I didn't look at the size of the buildings or the place of the buildings or anything like that. I'm just looking at the financial plan, and you'll see that come out over the weeks as we talk about these following steps. But what I would say as a financial guy, and a guy who owns a house and pays a lot of taxes, I said because it's an expensive year for financial reasons alone in 2008-09, and that we should probably delay this referendum on the bond issue until the taxpayers know all the tax implications for 2008 and 2009. That's what I would recommend if I were looking at it from a financial viewpoint, because then everybody would know exactly what the impact's going to be, and they could plan for it, and they could say, yeah, we can afford that, or they could say, gee, we can't afford that, and would be more sensible to take that approach. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to probably rush this bond issue through, and they're going to try to get it done for a lot of good reason. They want to get it done. But I'm saying if they do that, then you have to consider as taxpayers, if you can afford the 14% or whatever it turns out to be after reval, then that's okay, you know, not a problem. If you're concerned about it, then you probably ought to consider voting against the bond issue and asking them to come up with another bond issue as fast as they can that you can get the information on, so you know where you stand. It's very difficult to vote yes on something where you don't know what the impact's going to be to you and your family and the future of your family. So I'm not giving anybody any advice here. You make up your own mind, and you know your pocketbook. I don't know it, but I feel it's my obligation as a finance type program here to make that point for everybody. Okay, now that's all I'm going to talk about the bond issue tonight. I hope next week to do less, unless there's a lot of events that happen, like the bond issue results get made public, or it gets rushed to referendum or something like that, then we'll talk about it. But otherwise, I want to talk more about planning for success on this program, not about this particular program. This bond issue just brought things to a head for me, so I said I better get in here and look at it. So now I just want to put this slide up, which says the problem we talked about last week. And bottom line on the problem we talked about last week is we've been breaking even. We showed it. Somebody wants to see the tape, they're welcome to look at it. I had one mistake in there, and I'm going to correct it right now. I got feedback from several people. I had misread 1.63 as mils instead of percent, and other people tell me they've done the same in the past when going from mils to percents and all. So I had 1.63 mils as the average increase for the budget over the years, and in actual fact, it's 1.63% on an average for 10 years, not 1.63 mils. So it's lower than I thought it would be, which gives us a little more latitude, or maybe in raising taxes, maybe not. We'll go into that in a few more minutes. But what I want to say about that is this whole thing about raising taxes is a little tricky, because what happens here is it's over all the year. Let's say we have 10 years of only with one revaluation. In the future, there's going to be a revaluation every 5 years. This is the first 5-year revaluation. The last one was a 10-year revaluation. So that happened in the middle of these 10 years. Now, what I want to say to you is that in normal years, the budget goes up on average if you take out the reval year, about 3%. Then when a revaluation comes and drops the mill rate, it averages out the whole year to 1.63%. Now, I might say that the reval may not go up some year. It may go down. I mean, if there's a depression or if all the values of the houses fall down because so many go on the market that it depresses the values of the houses, which is quite possible, then you won't have that revaluation. Revaluation is basically to bring things it considers inflation. Over the last 10 years, property values go up so much, we'll do a revaluation, and that is basically for inflation. That's basically what it is, to factor that into our own figures here. So you'll find that the thing goes along, and then when there's a reval, it jumps way up. And that's what happens there. So anyway, the bottom line is, what you can talk about is, we're basically breaking even as a town. We get $1 in every year. We spend $1 every year. 0 goes into savings accounts. Some goes into the fund balance. But we got to be careful about the fund balance because that's needed for emergencies, and that's needed very badly if we have a disaster, if we have another flood or the town burns down, and that's not likely. Don't get scared. It's not likely, but that's what everybody's been telling us, why we need the fund balance. The other reason we need the fund balance is because we need to keep our credit high. We need to get low interest rates, so when we do borrow, preferably not big bond issues, but small bond issues, we get a very favorable interest rate. A couple of years ago, our bond rating from Moody's went down, and we're now paying a higher interest than we did a few years ago because our fund balance went down somewhere in the area of 400,000. Don't quote me on that because I don't know. Everybody argues about the numbers and they change every day, but somewhere down there when it should have been up around 1.5 million or so. And Henry Cicelli can tell you better than I can, and maybe some of the selectmen can tell you. But as you know, they've been talking about the fund balance all year and arguing and everything. Okay, so I'm not going to say. So the next slide thing I want to put up here is, guess what? The town charter. That's in always question too, the town charter. But when you look at the town charter, it says, hey, we're incorporated in 1771. Incorporated. We're a corporation. We're a company. Now, we're a small company. We're a $30 million company. 20 million of it, as I said earlier, comes from us, the taxpayers. 10 million or so comes from the state, as I said last week. So we're a small company, incorporated. If you read the history books, which I did, and I gave a copy to the selectmen of both history books, thanks to Tony Canavo, who had them all reprinted again. I gave a copy to the Board of Education, and I gave copies out everywhere. So, and you can go read one if you want, and if you can't get one there, I'll lend you mine. But it takes you, the first one, called the Annals of Winchester, or whatever it is, there, that tells you where all the corporations were set up. And they were basically set up so they could collect taxes to fund the churches that were set up in the early days. There was only one in the beginning, and then they started not getting along with each other, so they split and formed 2, and then they split and formed 3, and now you got a whole bunch of churches, but they all came from basically the same background, and they taxed people so they could pay for the church and pay for the minister or deacon or whatever they were in the churches, and they actually gave them a couple pigs a year and a bunch of wood and some money, and gave them housing, and they got that from the people in the form of one or another of taxes. So that's what I want to point about that right now, and that we are a corporation. Now, when you talk to people, and I'm sure you will, they'll say, we're not a corporation, we're a town, we're not a corporation. You don't understand, Brian. We have problems that corporations don't have. Well, I'll guarantee you, we don't have any problems that corporations don't have. We have similar problems to corporations, but what I do on that is I apply the 95% rule, and I wrote a paper on the 95% rule for the Highland Lake dock and mooring stuff, and I pointed out that 95% of the time in business, you delegate to people and they can get on with their job, 95% of the time. And they can go and, for example, our inland wetland man, he should be able to make decisions based upon a set of rules 95% of the time. 5% he might have to go back and ask the board for help. If you don't have that kind of an operation, you can't run a town efficiently. It's going to take forever. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So 95% of the time, we can set up a system that 95% of the time the people in the town can get on with their work and they can make decisions and they don't have to keep running for. We do kind of micromanage now. The selectmen are involved in everything, every decision. The taxpayers involved in everything. That's what the referendums are about. They're not everything, but they have to approve all monetary things over, I think, what's $15,000 or something like that. So, so what I'm saying here is, you show me, give me any example, send it by email, send it by mail, and I'll show you how a company has to deal with a very similar and same type of problem. And they have every problem you can imagine, right? And you have a lot less problems because you're only $30 million size company. And personally, to be honest with you, I haven't worked in too many that small. I have worked in some startups, and they were pretty small, but this is something we should be able to get our hands around pretty simply. But the same principles apply to a $30 million company or a $10 million company or a $500 million company, and that's what I'm going to try to show in the next few weeks in the simplest possible way that I can, so that you don't have to be a business major or a graduate of Harvard to understand it. So now I'm going to talk about what I consider to be the solution to the problem. And again, some people won't agree with me, and they all have their own, and that's okay too. That's what America's all about. We should be able to get together, however, and discuss these things without slamming and slandering and all that. And I'm trying to avoid all that here. So what I want to point out now is opportunity knocks, okay? And I'm going to show you in a minute opportunity knocking. Investors like bargains. So there's a cycle in economics and in businesses where if you have inexpensive land and beautiful surroundings, and for one reason or another it's cheaper to live here and invest here and have businesses here than it is anywhere else, people are going to come here. You're going to get people coming here to build developments, to build stores, to build factories. There's more complex when you get into factories because you need certain types of skills and things too, as we had in the old days. And you look in the history books, in the old days, we had skills here. We had the best machinists in the United States and in companies around here. We had, you know, a lot of the best tanners. People came here to tan because there was a certain property in the bark of the trees that was used in the tanning process. So experts came here and they trained other experts. They came here because a lot of the natural resources were good for building the knives and the size. My grandfather, great-grandfather, he worked in a knife factory. This guy, Mr. Batchelor, he had the sci factory, him and his brothers. So this was great. So we are, all our property values eventually are enticing by comparison to the surrounding areas. You know that. You go out around in these other places and it's more expensive than perhaps Winston is. People look at that, and it also has proximity to other things. It has proximity to New York, it has proximity to Boston, it has proximity to Hartford and all the other places around here, and that's very, very enticing to people. It has proximity to the ski area and all that. So I could sit here all day and talk to you about the advantages of this town, because I'm a positive system thinker, and I look at the good of all this stuff, but I can't help but saying it would be even better if we could address the problem. So let me just say one thing about positive thinking. Pointing out problems is positive thinking. It's not negative thinking. It's positive thinking because every problem solver wants to know what the problem is so he can try to solve it in a positive way. So you can't ignore these problems. You have to address them. And people say, well, you're being negative when you look at things. Well, I'm not being negative. I'm trying to say, hey, let's find out what the problems are. I'm going to give you a quick example of my wife and I walking around the lake. I got the nicest wife you ever want to have, very sweet and nice. And when I walk around the lake with her, she says, Brian, look at that. Somebody threw some trash on this road. Isn't that awful? And then she'll say, look at that. There's a nice bird over there. Let's look at that. Oh, look at the trees. The colors are so beautiful. And I say, watch out. You're stepping into a hole here. What? Car coming. Be careful. Don't get hit by the car. So I'm always looking to say, you know, how can I make sure, you know, that I look for the things that to be careful so that we don't have that. So between us, we're a team. You know, she points out all that stuff to me, and I point out all the other things to her, and together we get around the lake and get home. So I'm going to say to you that something good can be handled here properly, so we never give up. We can never give up. There are people in town telling me, Brian, this is a dead town. It's never going to make it again. Can't be done. Our days in the past. I don't believe any of that, okay? What I want to say is let's look at it, and I'll show you in a minute, and let's see what we can do. And I've been all over town talking to everybody about this, and they're getting to the point where people say to me, why are you always downtown? Why are you always in the city hall? Because they suspect that maybe I'm in there doing something I shouldn't be doing and finding out something I shouldn't be knowing. But if you don't get in and find out all these things, how can you in any way help? You can't do it. So let's keep up the good work done over the last 10 years, and let's continue to make success happen. I believe that the following is essential for prosperity. Now, I'm going to just show one thing that I was lucky enough to see this weekend, and that is, I showed this is the Republican, Sunday Republican. It's got a great article in it, which is Winston adds some polish. And if you look at the back page, it's a whole page on the positive things of Winston. Right? It's all positive. Now, there are a few things in there where it could be improved. There's a few things there. For example, they say the Gilson Theater is there, the Kelly's Kitchen, Health Food Corner, Christine's Flower Shop, Monaco's Restaurant, Mario's. You know, this is all good stuff. And then we're completing projects, Phase 1 of Main Street, Enterprise Corridor, New Arts and Science Building, which is beautiful down the library. I spent a lot of time down in the library. Expanded space in development. Greenway, Aurora Estates, Winston Furniture Company, American Mural Project with Paul Newman and Mario Andretti and other people like that. American Museum of Tort Law, which is, you know, a person I think is a little underappreciated here, Ralph Nader. I shouldn't have said that because everybody will get mad at me and all, but, you know, he's done a lot of good for people in the world, and he's trying to do some good in Winston. And my view is, hey, let's look at the good people are trying to do, and let's try to help them do better, right? And today I opened up the Republican. I don't have a copy with me, and there was another little article in there about 4 of the women in town who've done a wonderful job. I can name them. Barbara DeBellis, who's done a wonderful job. It's in the Republican today. Somebody wrote an article about it. I'm very impressed with Barbara. I've had a lot of good dealings with her, and she's very positive. And then Charlene Lavoie, I've also talked to her. I'm happy. She's in there, charging in there, trying to raise money to get this tort museum going, and she's out there working hard, very positive. Penny Owen, who I don't know, but she's doing a lot of good work, I guess, with the parks and having concerts and doing picnics and whatever she's involved in. I don't mean to slight her, but I'm not that involved in that. And then, of course, the Mayor Welcome, who's done a lot of good there. But one of the things I want to point out about the article, we put it down now, but that good has been done over the last 10 years, not over the last 2 years or the last 4 years. That's a lot of people working hard. Things are beginning to come together. I think what I'm going to talk to you tonight will help even more. Let's keep it up, and let's be positive. And the more positive articles we see in these papers, the better up, because that gives an image all over the state and everywhere, and that helps. Now, I did ask 1 or 2 people that were involved in the planning area, and I said, what is the thing people want to see when they come here? They said, good grades in the schools is one of the most important things. Good grades in the schools. So I think that's a very high priority. I want you to know. The other thing I want you to know, I gave this talk about the bond issue, there are some amount of that work in the schools that absolutely needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly, and you probably got to raise a bond for that because you don't have any other money anywhere, all right? So now what I'm going to talk about is options to begin to be able to save money. So what are these? Well, first of all, and this is, again, Brian's advice, I'm not going to talk too much about it, borrow for absolute emergencies only, like you would in your family. Borrow for only that which is absolutely necessary. Boil it down, borrow for that, because you have to pay interest on it, and it's going to come out. I think I calculated that if we do the total bond, it's going to be about 12% a year we carry for 20 years. Of course, it goes down because of inflation, and it goes down because we're paying some of it back. But, you know, it's a big number to be carrying for the next 5 or 6 years if it turns out to be anywhere near like we're planning it. So what I'm saying is, hey, got to look at that very closely, boil it down to what we absolutely need while we go with the next 4 steps I'm going to mention. The next step is, this is controversial, but because we're breaking even and we want to try to get ahead and we don't have any miracle happening right now, we do need to decrease, we may need to decrease spending or change our priorities. For example, if you want to sell the town, you need a salesman. You need to pay a salesman, I mean, on your staff or a consultant or whatever, but you've got to get into that mode. So we'll talk a lot about that on the show over the next few weeks, not tonight. The next thing is increase the average yearly taxes increases a bit from 1.63 to X to Y. I don't make those decisions, but there may be some room there and there may not be. If the taxpayers agree to do that, you can. But I can tell you, these first 3 steps are the toughest steps. They're like when you start working, when you get out of school and you haven't got a nickel and your folks say, you know, like my folks said, Dad, I said, can I borrow a dollar? Can I have a dollar? He said, go get a job. You know, so how do I get ahead? Well, you get a job and you improve your skills. And when you're a master whatever, you'll make more money and you'll be able to afford more things. Meanwhile, now I'll tell you, when I went through Kansas and I worked my way through, you could in those days, it's tougher today to do that. I had one coat the whole time. You know, I was ashamed to go to people's houses for dinner and for Christmas and for Thanksgiving because I didn't have any clothes, right? But I got through school and I got my degree and I got into the computer industry and I worked hard and did what I had to do. So we as a town have to do a similar thing now. We don't have, and if we go borrow and we get ourselves $5 or $10 million in interest to pay, that's going to put us deeper in the hole. Now we will get some work done, don't get me wrong, but it's work that's more catch-up work than it is how can we get ahead work, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So, and the next thing is expedite the increase. Last week I told you that we're on average, it doesn't quite go evenly over the years because of, again, the reval situation. Our average increase in the net grand list is about $16 million a year on average. And the way it actually works is about 2, 3, 4 million every year until reval comes in and boom, it jumps way up and you get the 16 average. So it isn't 16 every year. Some years it's 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever. And if we don't get the big reval, which is people don't like because their taxes go up, then we won't get the big jump in that money coming in. So we got to look at that. The next is we definitely have to have to expedite. We got a great opportunity here. And with the development up on the hill, and it's a great opportunity to get way ahead over the next 10 years. It's a longer-term solution because we're not going to get any money from the development for the first 2 or 3 years here. But then it's going to start to go up and like a ski slope, and we're going to begin to get money, and we can get up to 5, 6, 7, 8 million, and I'm going to show you later how we do that. Okay, so that's what it. You want a better idea of that? Give me a call. The net grand list has grown by 3.52% because of the inflation in the reval situation in the last time around. And but what I want to point out here is every year, all the development we're doing now, like Wallens Hill and the factory we just agreed to sell the other day, a couple weeks ago, all in people's taxes going up and new businesses coming to town and all. That's where we get the $16 million from every year. So. I put in here increases in property values, like every year your taxes go up, so that, you know, that's because that increases that grand list. New businesses are added, new homes are added, etc. So the important point on this slide is that I got mine a little, as usual, out of whack here, so I have to look at this. Is that we go about 3.52%. Now that's inflation. Inflation is 350 or so on average, give or take. We got to get up to 6 or 7%, just like you do in your investments when you go to invest your money. You got to get up to 6 or 7%, so you have extra money to then fix things, do things, or get new buildings, and all the things you want to do. I'm going to have to speed up a little here. So what I want to say to you now is that. We have, I showed you the steps to get, to try to get that 16 million up, or didn't I? I'm a little lost here. Well, no, I didn't. I somehow got a slide out of place. But anyway, the way you have to do that is you have to get a little bit up every year. So now you got 3.52% on average coming in every year, extra in the net grand list. You got to get up to 4.5. Then you got to get up to 5.5. Then you got to get up to 6.5. Then you got to, you know, somewhere around 6 or 7 is where you got to be eventually. Then you got to try to keep it there, okay? Now, the reason I'm giving you such a talk about this is because the grand leap may never come. Maybe we won't get the development in. Maybe they won't be able to sell the houses. This is unlikely, but, you know, you've got to plan for that. Now, somebody I was talking to today said, Brian, what if this bond issue falls? What are we going to do? How long is it going to take to get another bond issue out? If I were working on it and I was running it, which I'm not, And I appreciate the people who are doing it, and they're doing, they're doing their best. They're all doing the best. They think they're doing the best for the town. I don't have a problem with that. I would be working on the backup plan right now, so if it falls, boom, we know, and I would get a better representation on the team rather than just have people from one political party or one little factor. I'd have a balanced team. I'd have one Democrat, one Republican, one taxpayer guy, probably the controller of the town, one independent, and I try to get a small bond issue that would do that real critical stuff and have everybody see all the information and everybody be behind it, and that's called team building and all that, which we'll go into in future weeks. But for now, I want to say that we really got to concentrate on growing our net grand list, and we got to do it fast, or we're going to be in this pickle. We're still going to break even because there's no magic solution coming. Now, I want to talk about the long-term approach. The long-term approach, which I say here is more like the short-term. I got the short-term. I'm just going to go back a little because I found the slide. But basically, you can get a copy of this from me. I broke it down and say, here's how much money. If you increase it from 3.5 to 4.5, you're going to add 906,000. If you get it up to 5.0 with existing mill rate, you're going to add 1 million. That's $1 million. And if you get up to 5.5, you're going to get, that's $32 million. That is 16. It's almost double. You're going to get 1.108 extra in taxes, and that's, et cetera. So you can get a copy of that from me if you're interested in it. And but that's the way it's got to happen. Now, how long is it going to take to do all that? I can tell you, it's going to take a long time because right now we don't have anything in the works. There are no new factories coming to town. The ones that are coming, anything that is coming, is in the 16 million area. All right, finish up Wallens Hill, get this there, get this there. That's all got to happen every year. So you got to keep getting that 16 million every year. So and then on top of it, you got to start to grow it. Right. All right. Now I'm going to talk about the two largest tax assessed values in town right now. The first one is Howmet. They make turbine. They're a turbine manufacturer. They own about $8 million in assessed value. Second is CL&P. They got about $6 million in assessed value. So right now, if you add those up, it's $14 million. When the first housing development, which has been approved by Inland Wetlands and approved by Planning and Zoning, is in the process of getting approved by both the Army Corps of Engineers and the DEP, and they're getting closer, they say, to the end. I don't know, you never can tell with this whole thing, but when they're approved and they go ahead and build the houses, we're going to get in 100, when they're done, this is 10 years away, we're going to get about 115,250,000 for that. Then the second will be Howmet. Now, Howmet in 10 years will go up for inflation. I'm just trying to make a point here that we're going to be going from 14 million to 123. Now, these are all estimates. May never happen that way. There might be a big recession. There might be a big inflation. Who knows what these numbers will be? But this is just to give you a rough idea, orders of magnitude now. And anybody who tries to pick these apart, I mean, well, you're wasting your time because these are just rough guesses. And these are based upon the numbers, by the way, that they have put into the town. So they're not really just rough guesses. They're pretty well rough estimates. But anything can happen over the next 10 years. And there's also inflation on their properties. So we might be more than 115 there. All right. Now, when their second phase comes through, which they got through Inland Wetlands, they're going to get it through, hopefully, through Planning and Zoning. The first one that went to Planning and Zoning got denied for various reasons because it wasn't in line with the town's growth pattern plan. So now they're coming back in within weeks or months or whatever, and they're going to have a new plan. And I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. But they're going to, when that gets in, then they're going to add another 61 million to the assessed value list, and it's going to go up to 176 million here, right? Now I did a slide so you could see that when that happens, we're going to get a big jump from our present 588 million net grand list over the next 10 years. Now it's not tomorrow, to 764, and that's not counting any growth in the 16 million, right? So when you get it all, we're talking about a big 30% jump. Now, how does it affect taxes for us? Well, 20 million is what it is now. Remember I told you we had 20 million money we needed to divide into the divide by the net grand list. Well, it'll be 26 million. And $6 million more. And that ain't hay. And by the way, according to the developers, people who did the study, it costs about $600, give or take, for for the town to maintain any individual. That's in reports they submitted, and they're in the public record in the town. Now you'll get a lot of reasons why we shouldn't bring this into town. There's a whole lot of people who don't want the development in town or may not want it, but everybody, including me, wants to see it done properly. We wouldn't want to see it if it wasn't done properly. So that's up to the land use boards. I got nothing to say about that. And they got all kinds of conditions on these developers. And then later they have to work with the developers or any of the businesses in town to make everybody a success, because it's a symbiotic relationship between all of us. Now, we can see we have the possibility now to become pretty prosperous. And we can all work towards that end. Every business will be better off. Every contractor will be better off, probably, if they're good. If they're not, they won't get the business. But they have to compete for that business. They don't get handed on a plate. The next thing is gas stations will be better off. People in the own stores will be better off. And the taxpayers will be better off, because they'll have a lot of people to share the tax burdens with and get the money in to be able to fix the schools in the town. Now, if you have any question on what we could do with the money, just read my green papers. City Hall put out about a year ago, after a year and a half of study of the town, and you'll see where we can use it. By the way, some of it is for the things we want to do in the bond issue. One of the things I pointed out a year and a half ago was, hey, if we can get this in and get that money, we could clean up all the schools and get new ones and everything. That's all in the bond, in that green paper package. So it's been around a long time. It's not a new issue. It's been around. We've all known it was there, and we were all out there trying to find it. And I will say there were a few people in town in various different parties and associations that were down there trying to help speed and expedite this thing, because they saw that it was going to be an environment for which we could be successful here. All right, now I'm going to just quickly talk about sinking funds. That's why I got Mr. Batchelor here as a guest tonight. And that's sinking funds are savings accounts. And in my green paper, and I don't really care if you make sinking funds. I think they're the best way to go, but you could put them in savings accounts if you want. But if you put it in a sinking fund, that first you have to go to the taxpayers and say, we want to put money in a sinking fund from all this money coming in from the development and elsewhere. We want to put it into a sinking fund for a new fire truck 5 years from now. And every year we want to put some money in there. You go to them and they approve it. They're not going to approve it if you're also asking for a 10 or 15% tax increase. They're not going to go for that. But if you can show them that they'll probably get a minimal tax increase, I say in my green papers, and you can get money into the sinking fund, they'll probably approve that, right? Now, once it's in the sinking fund, nobody can change it unless you go back to the referendum again. If they decide 3 years from now somebody gives them a fire truck and they don't need the money for the fire truck, they might want to keep it for the next fire truck, or the town might say, we're better off buying a snowplow with it. So they go to the referendum, they show the people, and we want to move it from this to that. Now, the reason Mr. Batchelor is here is because in 1906, and if you look in the history book, Winsted and the town of Winchester, which I've read 10 times and given it out to people to read, says in here, that's how I found out he had a sinking fund here. He set up a sinking fund for the town, put in $25,000 in 1906, which was a lot of money in those days. And he said, this money is to be invested in the town at 2% interest, and when it gets to be $75,000, you can take 50 of it and spend it on the debt of the town, and leave the 25 to grow, and when it gets to 75 again, you can take 50 again. By the way, we still have that sinking fund. It's called the Winchester Sinking Fund. It's been around 100 years. It's in every, I guess they can't see me now. We got the slide up there. I'm trying to show them the book in the thing, so, okay, we're back to me. So here's the book. That's the Winsted book. You can all get it. I don't know if they got a library, but I'll lend you mine or get it out to the town hall. They got them. I gave them to them. Town of Winchester. I also think I gave some to the mayor as well. I gave them to the Board of Education. And I encourage them all to think like this. This is the audit report. You can see it in here, Winchester Sinking Fund. And I'm told there's roughly, I don't know, there's money in there, 60 or 70,000. There's more than 75,000 in there. So at the town's command, they can take some of that money, 50,000, and spend it on something reasonable for the town. Now, the town charter also says you can have sinking funds. And it says you have to go for a referendum to put the money in there. And you have to go to referendum to change it if you don't want to buy the fire truck or you don't want to buy a new police station. You could be saving one for a new police station or a new fire station. So that's the pitch I've been trying to get everybody. Now people say, oh, sinking funds don't work. There are a couple problems with sinking funds which I'll bring up. I still got another 15 minutes or so. The problems with sinking fund is if you don't put any money in, if you don't have any money, like now we're breaking even, we take in $1, we spend $1, you can't put any money in the sinking fund. Now, when in my green papers I say to you out there who are family members and not business people, if you're saving money for your child's education, college education, or for their wedding, or for their down payment on the house, or whatever you want to save for, then you put it aside in a sinking fund. It's not officially a sinking fund, it's your savings account. And then you guard it with dogs and everything else to make sure nobody takes any of that money to go on a vacation or to buy a new flashy car or to do something like that, because then it isn't there anymore for the education. And if you have 3 children, you might want to do 3 of those. Some people can't afford to do any of those, right? So my concern here is that across the town, we should set up a whole bunch of sinking funds. When the money starts, we can set them up with $1. When the money starts coming in, we can put them into those sinking funds. Now, is that going to solve our immediate problem? No, it's not. That's why I say we got to reduce spending. We got to watch very carefully what we spend money on, so we don't make our problem worse. Because we're not going to be able to grow. If we grow the net grant list and we keep growing the budget at the same amount, just to cover inflationary things, then we're never going to get ahead. So I want to point out to everybody, you can read the charter. It's on page, I got to get my glasses. Let me put my glasses on for this. It's on page 16. In the history book, if you want to look, it's on page, I think it's 149. And here, there is no page number on this in here, so you just have to ask Henry Centrella to show it to you, and he'll show it to you. All right, so that's kind of that. Now, I wanted to talk. I still got a few minutes left. So now what I want to do is just talk about a few principles and a few concepts. And one of the things I want to say, and I'm going to open myself to criticism for this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm getting older now and I won't be around forever. But what I want to do is I just want to say I do have a sheet here that I can give you, anybody who writes in or sends me an email, about the positives of the development. And there's a lot of negatives too that come with anything. When you're in a business, you take risk. Risk is associated with your family, as risk is associated with your business. And the way you get around the risk is you get in and work together as a team. And because the development needs a good town too. I mean, they don't want to come into it with a big ritzy development into a town that has bad roads and bad, we don't have bad schools, but they wouldn't want to go in anywhere. That's the first question they ask, remember, is how are, I'm told, I don't talk to them, but and whenever I moved around, and remember 14 cities in 4 countries, some twice, I always went where the good schools were. And then I traveled the 2 hours to work or the 1 hour to work so the kids could go to good schools. And people will do that. So we really got to get that as a high priority, those test scores, and get some money in there. And I think that's very important. So if anybody wants this list, and if you can tell me more advantages or disadvantages, and these are all approximate because, they're for planning purposes, and we don't have any, we haven't sold any of the houses, so we don't know exactly what we're going to get for them. But it's going to be a nice golf course, and I was told today, first of all, let's deal with a couple of the real issues. Well, why don't you like the development? Oh, we don't like the development because they have a rule there which says you got to be 55 and older to live in these 450 houses. Well, they might change that rule. Well, they can't change the rule unless they get their own housing committee association to agree it. And then they have to come to the town of Winchester, P&Z, and they have to agree it. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll say, yeah, they can have kids, and our schools will be able to handle it, be fine. And maybe they won't. So the other thing is they are giving land, 146 acres for conservation. They're having a golf course, top-notch golf course. I've been to all the meetings. I've listened to the golf course designers. And they're going to let anybody, it's going to be a public course. Anybody in Winchester can join and go there. They first started out saying it would only be 100 people, but they've changed that. They're preserving the historic sites. Robbers Cave will be preserved, and if there's other historic sites there, they're going to bend over backwards. They will be bonded. These are all the questions people ask me, so I try to answer those. If you want a copy of this, let me know, and I'll give it to you. The other thing I want to say, and I've only got 5 minutes, it's going to be quick, and this is what's going to cause controversy, but I'm going to do it anyway. When I was a young kid, I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes. I love Sherlock Holmes, and it was a great influence on my life because there was a fellow named Dr. Bell at the University of Edinburgh. That's who Sherlock Holmes was patterned after, and he was the science of observation. So I have learned running around the world, troubleshooting and building companies and helping people turn companies around and big computer systems around to observe. And wherever I go, people don't realize how much I can observe because I'm trained to do that. So I've put together, based upon the things I learned in a study in Scarlet and few other writings by Conan Doyle, based upon the thought press of Dr. Bell at Edinburgh University, that's who Sherlock Holmes was patterned after, I learned how to do a lot of observation. So I wrote together a paper here called Early Warning Signs, mainly about the bond issue, okay? And they're the kind of things that when I come in, I don't even have to see the package that's about that big. I just have to look at the whole approach that was taken, and I've listed 17 issues here that concerned me about the whole thing. So if you want a copy of that, let me know and I'll give it to you. Next week, we're going to talk about how to organize for success, to be able to get this kind of work done, to be able to get grow the income in the town. And one more thing, because I only got a couple minutes, development is not my idea. I just came in, I looked around, I said, where can we get this this grand leap from? There doesn't seem to be much else. So that came. If some other opportunity comes, like a big factory wants to come in and everybody in town wants to have it, and they want, I'm in favor or whatever. We just got to try to make it work all together, get together and pull on the oars and try to have it. And also, once we approve things in our committees, we don't want to. We can't be undermining it all the time. We got to get in and help make it all work. We got to help make the Tort Museum work. We got to help make the museum work. We got to help keep the university working. We got to help the restaurant people get more business and we all got to work together. It's got to be a positive attitude, all going in the same direction, all pulling on the oars, and nobody dragging their feet. I only got 2 minutes. I'm going to give you one example. When I went out on one place, and I can't give you the example. I'll give it to you next week. We don't have enough time for the example. Anyway, thanks for all the positive feedback. Anybody sees any errors or anything in numbers, give me a call. Or rather, send me a postcard or do me an email, and then we'll address it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. everybody. This is Brian O'Haron. This is the fourth in a series of 13 programs where we're going to be discussing planning for progress, using the town's business model as an example of how we can improve things. The first thing I'd like to do on each program is just quickly go over the bond issue so those people who have other things to do and aren't interested in the rest of the program can go ahead. But every week I will quickly go over this. There's not much to say this week, but for the agenda we'll go over the bond package status. We'll go over the progress to date on the show here. We'll talk a bit about management by objectives and some examples. Organizing for success. And then next week, a bit about what we're going to be talking about next week. I'd like to put up the town charter just to remind everybody. Go ahead and take a picture of that, Christine. Yeah. The town charter, just to remind everybody that I have my daughter here today working the camera for the first time, and she's going to help me out. This is incorporated in 1771. I just put this up to show you the town charter, that we were incorporated and we are a business. Always have been a business since day one. Probably always will be a business. The 49.1 million bond package hasn't made much progress this week as far as we're concerned, because we haven't received, it's moving along kind of slowly. I mean, probably fast behind the scenes, but slowly as far as we're concerned. No official facts are available to the public from town officials any more than were the last few weeks, so we didn't receive anything new this week. I didn't check this morning, but up until today, we hadn't had anything. Referendum will most likely be after the elections on November 6th. I think that's good because it gives us more time to prepare for our tax evaluations and, you know, our own business plans, and it gives us more time to do that, so to understand these financial implications. Okay, the 20920 budget status, the bond financial facts should be here in weeks, if not a month or two. I don't know, nobody seems to know when we will have those. The revaluation information should be here in early January. We're not sure exactly when. It might be a little early, might be a little later than that, but by then we'll have some idea about the revaluation. I just want to remind everybody, because there is still confusion about it, that the revaluation will have a new average assessment value for the average people in town when it's done. It'll also drop the mill rate. And those people that are above the average, way above the average, will probably see a tax increase of some sort, and those that are below the average might get a little decrease. But I'm not going to talk too much more about that because it's too complex for this kind of a program. If anybody wants to talk more about it in person, I'll be happy to do so. The 20809 budget will be ready somewhere up around June, July when they have the referendum. So when all these things are done, we'll know kind of what the pieces are for next year's budget, which I think is a very interesting year. Now, where do we stand? The last few weeks I've been putting up this slide, if you can focus on the slide. Number one, I said we would try to identify the problem, which we did, I think. I hope you can read that. Proposed required solutions, we did that last week, and then I said this week we would talk a bit about organizing for success. Now remember, this isn't a Harvard business course. Will cost a lot more than the free thing I'm doing here, but I'm just trying to get across the principles to common ordinary people who haven't gone to Harvard and want to know a bit more about the town and how the business is run. So, the first thing I want to say is that since we are a business, I showed you the charter, I want to remind you that we probably should run like a business. I did try a new font this year, this week on the slides. It looks like it's going to be much easier to read for you. I've been playing with the computer trying to get better slides for you because not everybody can always understand my Connecticut accent. First thing I want to talk about as far as running as a business, I think is very important, is a technique called management by objectives. It's very important that any business CEO, chief executive officer, and his board of directors set a very high level of objectives each year for for that year and many years to come for the business to follow. That's how businessmen operate. It's not in focus, I don't think, dear, but I can't tell from here. Yeah. It's okay? All right, thanks. Set high-level objectives each year for many years to come for the business to follow, reviewing progress each quarter, or more frequently, they're called quarterly reviews in business, if necessary. So when you're kind of in trouble, you might want to review every month. When I was working in the NASA programs, in the space programs for various vendors, we would have a review 3-4 times a day, every day, 7 days a week, especially during launches. So when things are critical, you have more reviews, and then you make more decisions to keep things on from going off the critical path and getting into trouble. The next thing is, when you run by objectives, you have to really delegate authority once the objectives are there to the management team, enabling them to create lower level objectives. And I'm going to explain a bit about that tonight. And a related plan each year in an attempt to achieve the high level objectives. Let them, they have to let the people get on with the job, as I mentioned last week, 95% of the time. That's called the 95% rule in business. And it means that 95% of the time they should have enough information and enough direction and enough power delegated to them to get on with the job and get things going. The other 5% is managed by exception. That's when they can't go and they need help, and then they have to go to management for help. And that's called management by exception. And that is not a bad sign. It's good when people come and ask for help, providing, you know, they do it within the flavor of the plan. The next thing I want to point out is that there are two such kind of objectives. There are many more after you get going on the plan, but the first thing you want to do is establish a high-level objectives. And when I try to find the high-level objectives for Winston, I've asked several people in the town hall. I don't think there are any that I can at least find. If there are some, somebody please tell me, because I would love to see them. So the first thing we want to do, and the CEO and the managing board, the board of directors, which is the selectmen, need to establish high-level objectives. They only need to be 5 or 6 of them. I've seen guys run big companies like IBM come to the annual meeting, or come to the meeting with 125 vice presidents and list 5 objectives for the year, and maybe another 5 for the next 5 years. That's called the 5-year planning when you do that. So establish high-level objectives, and then establish lower-level objectives that fit within the high-level objectives. As you drop down the organization, the objectives become more towards what the people at that level have to achieve and do to get the job done. Then once you get these objectives agreed by the management team and you publish them and everybody knows what they are, they can't be done in secret. It's all got to be out in the open so everybody knows exactly what they have to do. If they don't know what they have to do, and I'm going to talk more about that later, then they can't do it. So we want next to produce a plan of some sort, which is basically, again, by objectives. It's time frames and what are you going to try to achieve in a time frame. You might not always know how you're going to do it, but you have to set some objectives down and then work towards resolving all the problems that pop up in management by exception. And you always got to be lookout, like I said about walking around the lake last week, always be looking out for the exceptions and then deal with them in a rapid manner. And when we talk about speeding things up, and in a couple shows from now, I'm going to talk a lot about how to speed up a very sluggish, bureaucratic organization. Not necessarily our organization, but other sluggish bureaucratic organizations. Mainly when I get involved in things around the world, they are in need of help. Otherwise, they don't need me. They don't need a troubleshooter. So, or they need new management, or in a fast growth, they need new management. We need to publish these things widely. You need to make a simple plan and a high priority, not a big, thick plan like this. A very simple plan. Now, we do have the equivalent of that with the bond package, in that we have a very small summary of it, and that's good. That's something that saves people from having to read the whole plan. And the summary, which most people will read, is very, very good, and you should be able to tell you exactly what you have to do. Now, I've seen summaries for big companies that are 2 or 3 pages. Don't have to be a lot of pages. The more succinct they are, the more precise they are, the more people will read them. It's not surprising that people won't read a big, heavy, thick package because, you know, for all kinds of reasons. You know, they don't have the time for one thing, and maybe don't even have the experience for another. It covers a pretty wide range. So normally, a whole team has to look at these packages, and I think that's what's happening in Winston now with the bond package. You have to give the simple plan a high priority. High priority, the highest priority in the town will be to meet the 5 or 6 objectives that are set by the CEO and the board of directors, and then you have to review the progress frequently. Now I'm going to now give you a high three examples of what I consider to be the lower things, because I think I got out of place the higher one. Either that or I didn't put it in here. Anyway, let's talk about the higher without the slide. The higher level objectives are pretty simple, and I'm just going to give you the ones that the Republicans are talking about for now, if I can remember them. I had it on a slide and I misplaced it. But number 1, revenue. That's their top priority. If they get elected, and I think it should be everybody's top priority, as I said last week, to get revenue into this town by one manner or another, and we'll talk a bit about that tonight. Number 2 priority is budget. And while we're in this tight pinch right now of breaking even every year and not being able to afford maintenance and things like that, we need to look hard at the budget and make sure that it's all absolutely well spent, and that the priorities for spending this money are right. And I think when we get done with a few of these shows, you'll begin to question these priorities, because I think, first of all, that we need a real high priority on revenue. So if we don't have the highest of priorities on revenue right now, that's, you know, that isn't going to help us as a company. So I think that's very important. The next priority they have is charter change. They want to look at the charter and make it so the charter allows us to do the kind of things that we want to do to run like a business. And then the final one they have 5. The final high-level one they have is to look at the infrastructure in the town and see, I guess the biggest example of that, and I think they covered it in the bond package, although I'm not positive of it, is to get the school buildings under the control of the town so that they can spend the money and maintain them from year to year and be in charge of that, and that the educators can then concentrate on the education and not have to worry about the maintenance issues and the development issues of the buildings and all that kind of thing. So now they could have more objectives. They could have 6 or 7. The more you get, the more unwieldy and the harder it is to understand. But that's very much how that stands. So now we're going to talk about the next level down, which is I'm going to talk about a little more. The 5 are pretty easy to understand, and if I find the slide, I'll pop it up for a minute. But we're going to talk about 3 things. Now, I have this week prepared 3 sort of high-level business plans for the town, and one of them is to maintain our existing growth about inflation. Inflation is about 3.5%, including food and fuel and things, pretty on average over the 10 years. I might say here, and it's been pointed out to me by various people, that one of the reasons it is high like that is because we had the revaluation, and the revaluation put the value of the property way up and the interest rate down, and that helps. So normally we have the growth of about, I forget, 1.9%. I've got another page. I'm sorry, 0.97% on an average over 10 years, but because it's brought down by the revaluation year we had every 10 years. In the future, the revaluation year will be every 5 years. Starting this year, it'll be every 5 years. There's new rules in town, in the state rather. And as far as, and I'm not an expert on those things, all I know is we're having a reval this year, and we might have one again in 5 years, and it's kind of what the plan is. So that does affect things. So when I did the spreadsheets, which I'll have available next week and may discuss here next week, I did break, I took the 26% with that we went up last time, and I split it in half, and I put half of it in for the beginning of next year, because that's when the reval will take place, will hit the books rather, and then half for 5 years later than that. So instead of having one every 10 years, we'll have one every 5 years, and that'll help us a little because it'll spread out some of this and be a little easier to keep track of. So we're going to talk about the 3.52%. We're going to talk about trying to get it up to 6%, as I mentioned last week, with some objectives for doing that, and I did a little spreadsheet and a plan for that, and it's all based on assumptions, and I will spell out what the assumptions are next week when I go over the spreadsheets. And then the last one, but not least, and you're going to see next week when I show you the spreadsheets why we need it is the quantum leap that I've been talking about. Right now, we keep, over the last 10 years, as I've been mentioning, we keep breaking even and we borrow minimally. We kind of borrow minimally. And we need to keep doing that for a few years. I would say the spreadsheets look like, if the assumptions are right, and they'll always change the assumptions. They have to be looked at all the time with management by exception. But as soon as some new thing, like when the reval gets done, then we'll know better and we can change the spreadsheets. And then when the budget comes in next year, we'll know better, we'll change the spreadsheets again. It's a constant battle between setting objectives, writing them down, setting plans for the objectives, and then management by exception, watching it like a hawk and changing it as soon as something comes along that requires our attention. So that's what we've been doing, and I can tell you, after looking especially at the bond package, but in general in your own household, you know, once I was about 40 in California and I was taking a new job in New York City. I think it was a New York City job. I lose track of these things. And I went to the bank and I said, I'd like to have a line of credit so that my wife can come down and borrow some money should I be in Europe or something and not be able to handle it quickly. And the lady took a look at my papers and said, Brian, you don't have any debt. Your family has no debt. And I said, well, you know, I thought that was the objective here. You know, we lived a lot of years in debt when we were younger. And I remembered I borrowed $1,500 to get through college when I worked my way through college. Joyce and I worked a lot in the last year there. And it took me 10 years to pay it off in those days. $1,500 was a lot of money on top of your normal living expenses when you leave school. So the thing I want to say to you, and you all know this from your own family, debt is expensive. You know what credit card debt is now. It's very expensive. And I avoid paying any credit card interest whatsoever at any time because it's not worth it. I put off purchasing things if I have to. But what I want to point out, besides the bond package, besides our normal budgets, we still have a lot of debt to consider in the future. And that debt is buildings. We have other buildings besides the ones that are in the bond package that are going to need attention over time. We also have all the buildings on Main Street that I pointed out in my green paper. If we could help with that to get people there and to get them to fix it up and all that, and that's a whole big issue for a whole show in the future here. But buildings are going to need attention. School non-capital, the teachers, and getting all the things we need that besides fixing up the buildings and everything, getting you know, all the things we want to do with the schools in this town. Police and fire non-capital, things that they're going to need along the way. Highland Lake and things it'll need over the years. I wrote about that in the green paper. There's a whole list of things over the many years that they're going to want to do one way or the other at Highland Lake, some of which they want to do already. Foster future development. We're going to have to spend money to get the revenue up and get future development in. That costs money. I want to point that out a little later, a bit more about that. Roads. So eventually we're going to have to do more roads. We're going to have another fixing up the roads. Matching funds. One of the problems I notice in the town is that we don't always have the money for the matching funds for getting loans or getting money from the state. You know, the free money from the state, which isn't free, but you know we sometimes think it is. And then you know we need to monitor all these development events and all the stuff that's coming into town. We need help with that, etc. This is not an exhaustive list. Some of these things maybe shouldn't even be here, but they're there. And anybody can question them and add to them or subtract from them. I'm just trying to get a point across. There's going to be a lot more debt coming up in the next X years, and we're going to have to handle it. And I haven't even mentioned an emergency. If we have any emergencies, like the state stops giving us some $1 million or something, we might need it. So what I've done here is I put a little target together. It's not the best slide in the world. I drew it by hand. This is a target. And this little black piece in the center, that's what I call the critical stuff that needs to be done. So this is like a criticality target. These are the most important things that need to be done right now in the schools, or whatever they are. Okay, fix the bathrooms, do this, do that. Same in the fire department, same in the police department, and we should be targeting those, and we should be looking at them very hard and say, what is the minimal bond we can put together to do that? Now, if we approve this existing bond the way it is, I'm happy with that. I'm not, you know, we'll live, we'll pay our taxes, as I said before, but I want to suggest that if I were running a business, this is the first thing I would look for, is what are these absolute most critical things, and try to keep that debt down as much as we can while we try to grow the revenue so that we don't need as much debt in the future. Then this is the second layer of criticality. You have to define what that is, and that's for the next set of bonds or for some of the money coming into town, et cetera, et cetera. I'll tell you, get out of here where these are the last things you want to do, and they can wait a few years. Now, the bond package does go over 7 years, so I don't want to think everything's going to be done at once. And might even, from what I read in the newspapers, it might even stretched out even more than that because some of the schoolwork won't even start now until the 4th year. But until we get the facts, we won't know. But I wanted to get this target out here because we're going to be talking a lot about that as we go through the rest of this program. Not the target itself, but the principle. All right, last time we said, or that the average growth, I think it was, I can't even remember which time we said it, but the average growth right now is 16,026,447 every year. But again, that's a lot lower than that during the non-reval years, and then higher in the reval year, and it averages out to 3.52%. So that number, I'm going to show you what I consider to be the lower objectives for dealing with that number. These are objectives. The CEO of the town and the selectmen should set some objectives for bringing that. Well, they don't need any really objectives here. These are objectives if you don't do anything. Okay, so I put 3.52% in each year just to show you that we're going to keep up with inflation for that. Unless we do something different than we're doing now, and we do what we did over the average over the last 10 years, we're just going to stay with inflation. And we'll have, if we get the money in to keep up with inflation, which I think we will right away because we are having a reval this year, so that'll bring in some money. But if you figure on the average, we're going to kind of be breaking even. And we have to have the discipline here to keep the budget down when we first get the reval done, so that we don't get up too high with it and have to sustain a higher budget. So now I'm just pointing out the revenue here, but when I do show you the spreadsheet next week, it's going to have the budget sticking at that as well, because unless you raise taxes, cut the budget, or raise taxes, cut the budget, or whatever, you're not going to be able to, or get more revenue in, you're not going to be able to do anything but this here. So that's that set of objectives. It's the normal average growth. The present rates will cover only inflation, nothing else. There'll be no savings. There'll be no money for emergencies or major improvements. And when the bond passes, taxes will be included in the budget year to pay the interest and principal on the bond. So that'll affect us differently. But that'll raise the mill rate and cause a different set of problems. I'm sorry, not mill rate. It'll raise the mill rate, but the mill rate will be a little different because of the reval. So that's what's happening there. So we've got the average, and we show you how that's going to come down. Now, the next thing I want to show you is that the second thing we can do, and the first thing we can do really to raise the revenue, is to try to get to a goal of 6%, and try to get that revenue up over the years till it doesn't average 3.52% anymore, but it averages 6%. And that will cover inflation plus some money to either spend or some money to spend. I mean, spend or save, right? So the first year, 2007, 2008, 3.52%. I believe that's the same because I don't think we've got anything coming in here that's above the 16 million. We've got to bring in money to get to the 16 million, our average. And so I left 3.52 for next year. The following year, move it up. I also left it at 3.52. This year it's 5.2. Next year it's 3.52. Then I moved it up to 4%. That's just an objective. We may not make it. We may get more. We may get less. But that's the objective that a whole town will have to work for and figure out what are all the things that need to be done to be able to achieve that. The next is 4.50%. The next one is a year later for 5%. And then for 5.50 and 6%. I have a spreadsheet for that. I'll go over a little more detail next week because that includes mill rates, it includes budgets, it includes all kinds of interesting things, and you can get a pretty good picture of how the town will run if we go in that direction. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it now, but I wanted to get the point across that this is what we need to do. This, a similar thing to this, in addition probably to cutting some budgets, in addition to raising some taxes a bit, there has to be a balanced plan put together by the CEO and the Board of Selectmen, and it has to be right out in the open where we can all see it and we know what's happening. And when you do it that way, it'll be easier for others to accept it as well, and to get their feedback in. That's called the management by exception. All right, now I have another slide up here which is going to show that to obtain a quantum leap in revenue, the growth, we eventually, we need a quantum leap. That's what I told you about, okay? And the quantum leap is where we try to get the 6%, still want to get the 6% by going up that 4 or 5 year ladder I put there, from 3.5% to 6%. But we want to overlap it with the money from the possible quantum leap. And I want to explain that in a minute. But before I get to the quantum leap, I want to put up this slide which says we have to resolve a key issue in the town. And I think they're working on it. I'm not sure they're working on it in a balanced way, i.e. all the selectmen together as businessmen. I don't think that's happening. And I think there's tension in the town about this. But we need to resolve this key issue of how we're going to grow. And how much open space are we going to preserve? How many factories are we going to let into town? How many developments are we going to let into town? What types of developments are going to? That all has to be agreed as part of the plan. Otherwise, you can't. The objectives won't work. So I want to point out here that there is a thing. I hope we can get this slide on. Okay, I drew this up just with a black pen. There's a thing called the normal distribution curve. Most of you probably know what a normal distribution curve is. And basically, take any issue, I don't care what issue it is, mostly when you have a lot of people, their views fall along this curve. So if you say, who wants to keep the town green? Everybody will give you an answer that probably falls along this curve. Who wants to grow the town like heck? You'll probably get an answer that falls along this curve. And what you get is you get the extremes over here that say, we want it to all be green and be, keep it just like it is, exactly the way it is and forever. But we still want all the good schools and the good buildings and all that kind of thing. That's a little hard to achieve, but it's possible. Next is to come over and say, here's the other extreme, which says, we're not worried about any of that. We want to have, we don't know, no green, zero green. I don't think there's anybody like that, but I'm just trying to make a point here. So please don't say on all your other shows that Brian says nobody wants to save the green. Actually, most people fall along the normal distribution curve. They're all mostly in the middle. So if you pick almost all these issues, especially my own viewpoint, it's in the middle here. I think we need to keep as much open space and green as we can, and we just need to balance it with enough development and factories and things to keep the people living to the standard that they want to live to. If they don't want to live to a certain standard, they can always lower the standard. That's your prerogative as a town. But the standard we want to live to now, we need to do something different. So we're going to talk a lot in the weeks about the normal distribution curve. So we need to resolve that problem as a board of directors and a CEO and as a town, and we need to know where we want to go before we can really do anything. But while that's happening, there is a golden goose, so to speak, coming into town. It's already been approved by the land use boards, and I mentioned last week, and that's the development of Upper Aurora Rosa and Winchester Estates. Now, again, that's happening. That's moving along. Winchester Estates still needs one or two more permits, but they have the inland wetland approval. They now have to go for the back again to planning and zoning where they were denied. They don't seem to think they need to go to the state, again, the Army Corps and DEP on that one for various reasons that I'm not quite up to date with. But Tony Solano will be on a later program tonight. Maybe you want to watch that and listen to him, and he'll talk about all these issues on the Jay Buttigieg program. But what I want to point out is that should we consider the quantum leap, I want to point out that it is very expensive to go out and try to get a quantum leap, because you've got to organize to go find people that want to come to town that can provide a lot to the tax base. So we got to be careful about looking a gift horse in the mouth. When somebody wants to get into town, and they're kind of knocking our door down, and they're very cooperative, and they're not perfect by any means, but they do want, then we should probably be as reasonable as we can about trying to get them in a very safe and sane manner. All right. So I'm just saying that you have to weigh these things off. Because when I was in business, I did a lot of troubleshooting around the world, and when I was working for Univac, I was very young at the time, they said, Brian, we don't want to lose one customer, not one bank, not one airline, no customers. Why don't you want to lose the customers? Well, because if we lose the customer, then the bank, all our competition will go out around the world and say, they are no good in banking. They just lost the biggest bank in New York, or the biggest bank in Australia, or the biggest bank in Hong Kong. And that would make the sales efforts very difficult for the whole company, and they just didn't want that problem. So they said to me, whatever it takes, you go out and you save these customers. And if I had to move priorities in the factory to get equipment there, if I had to bring more people, experts in, whatever I had to do to put a plan together for success. Luckily, while I was there, we did lose one or two customers because sometimes they're so far gone you can't save them. But what I want to say to you is that when we want to grow our revenue, we've got to treat our existing customer clients here, the stores in town, the businesses in town, we got to treat them with customer satisfaction. I was Mr. Customer Satisfaction for two companies. One for ICL, the 5th largest computing company in the world, for 7 years, and for Univac for a couple of years there. I was with Univac for a long time, but I only held that position for a couple of years. So I really know what customer satisfaction means, and I can talk forever about it, but I don't have the time tonight. Maybe in a future program, when we talk about techniques, we can talk about customer satisfaction. So whenever I see an opportunity, I think about that, and I try, well, how can we make it so everybody's happy? The people in the town, the developers, and everybody wins. How can we get into that kind of a situation? Now, the quantum leap is trying to move our base up. And I've done a spreadsheet for that, which I'll go over next week. Not the whole spreadsheet, because it's very complex, but I will go over a majority of it. And what I say here on the quantum leap is, first we keep trying to get in the 5 to 6% growth, and then, and by the way, it overlaps in about, in 2014, that's when, on the other chart, I show us getting up to around 5.5%. Well, that's when if this development goes ahead, that's about when it'll start to produce some money. And I added 3% in each year for 8 years for the development money, and that's roughly the way, if all things go according to plan, if all things happen, that's kind of the way it might go. It might be less, it might be more. I have to re-emphasize that, because these things, when you deal with these objectives, you have to deal with the best information you have available, and then you have to watch, banjo by exception, you got to watch for it to change. And when it changes, you got to take action, and you got to face the fact. When people call me and tell me I made a mistake on a program, I fix it right away. And I try to fix it and say, sorry, I made a mistake. Now here's the real fact. So what I've done here is I started to build it up, and it's going to take 8 years after we wait 4 years for the money to come in, 3 or 4 years. Okay, so we got a long period of time here, but we actually get up to a cumulative of 9%. We start about 8.5%, and then when we add the 6 and the 3, when we get up to 6% here, then we got 9%. So what you're going to see on the spreadsheet next week is money to spend and money to save, and that we can then begin, as we come up, we'll be able to be in the driver's seat a little more than we are now, and that's very important to understand. So it's an evolution. The quantum leap is an evolutionary approach to the quantum leap, and quantum leap, unless somebody says, okay, we're going to move a whole factory into town with 1,000 employees over the next year, then we'd get it quicker. But that's not likely to happen. It's likely, now, and if the development doesn't happen, we have to find another quantum leap. And if we don't find another quantum leap, then we'll have to live with the results of growing it up. And staying at 6% or even getting to 6% may not be possible or practical. That's something we have to look at as well. I just use that today for an example. The CEO and the selectmen have to get together as businessmen and come up with what they think is realistic and what they think they can achieve, and then adjust the whole plan accordingly. Now, the quantum leap if you look at your own personal family, your quantum leap is equivalent to a huge promotion in your job, usually brought upon by things you do, you know, to improve your skills, or maybe even a little luck sometimes. Or it's equivalent to a new job that dramatically affects your quality of life. And we've had those in the past, and they do help, and that's how people get from earning a nickel an hour to earning $2 an hour. You know, they improve their skills, and they take advantage of opportunity and whatever else, and they work hard. So that's kind of what we have to do as a business. Now, getting up to that, I say here, it's going to take about 14 years or so to get to the end of that. By then, a lot of other things will be going on in town, and maybe we'll have some other people coming in, and maybe we won't. So that's something we can manage from year to year and keep everybody aware of and appraised of. And then we can save the money or we can spend it. And I do show in the spreadsheets that if we save it and we invest it at 6%, you know, we get quite a bit of money over time. It takes a long time. It's hard to earn, just like in your own family, but there is no other option. Either you do it or you live with what you got. That's it. Okay, I want to now put up a problem solving, because we're going to move into what I consider the organizational aspect for the next 22 or 3 minutes, and that is the problem solving. I drew up a little quick thing. When you go into problem solving, which I've done again in all kinds of environments and all over the world, in socialistic, communistic areas everywhere, people are common denominator are the same everywhere. And when you deal with these kind of things, you have to take the same approaches. It's a little harder in some areas than others. Isn't easy here in Winston. But basically, if you take a triangle, I use this in courses I give around the world, and I don't do it anymore, but I used to a lot, to my own employees mainly, or people that work for me. And that if you had a triangle, when you do a problem, when you do a system, or when you manage a company, you're always trying to go down this slope on the triangle. You have stages along the way here. You know, find the development, work with the development, get the development in, you define it all, and you should be able to go down a slope. If you don't stop and define properly in the beginning, this is the definition period here, it gets a little less as you go along, and you manage by objectives along the way here on this triangle, so that if you pop up with a problem in here, then you all get around the table and come up with a resolution and adjust the plan. Now, but if you don't do that, then you get this kind of a triangle. It's backwards. And what happens is you do less definition up front, and then you find out more problems as you go along. And you never get to the end because you're going this way towards infinity rather than this way towards the end and success of the project. And if you're a businessman, and I'm trying to make a strong point here about businessmen, they want to make a profit. They want to make, at least break even, certainly make a profit. And this, I've talked to barbers about this, and they follow the same approach. You know, they have years, lean years, and they have good years. And that goes for almost anybody in business. They have to really consider this and make sure they know. Now, a great percentages, as you probably know, businesses go broke. You know, they don't make it. So you have to be very careful with businesses. Now, the next thing I want to point out is that in order to make it, to take this kind of approach, you got to avoid redundancy. And by avoiding redundancy is what I mean. When you get in here and you don't define properly, you start circling around. You go up here and then you got to go back. And you go up here and you got to go back. And you go up here and you got to go back. And, you know, then they call in somebody like me to turn the triangle around, stop everything, define it, make it go down, right? That could take years to do that in some places. So I drew a little sort of whatever you call it here, to show you that you can go around in circles here pretty easy. So I really want to point this out because it's going to set the scene for the next couple of tough love slides that I have here to put up. I'm going to say this. Some people won't like to hear it, but if you're going to run like a business, you have to face this in the beginning of the triangle and go down the slope, not at the end. So my basic point here, I always think I have more points to make than I have time, and I always seem to get them in, so I'm happy with myself here. But anyway, now we're going to talk a bit about organizing for success, so we can have the triangle face in the right direction and not have all the redundancy and go, okay. Now, in order to run a business, it's my personal view that you need businessmen to run the town, and that you should elect as many businessmen as you can. And I mean experienced businessmen. I mean people that have worked for years and had a successful business Having somebody who had failed businesses isn't as good as having somebody who's had successful businesses. Now, I'm not saying we've got anybody who has failed business, but I'm saying you got to look and you got to say, we want successful businessmen to run our business and help us grow the business and attract all this stuff. Now, I want to say that personally, if I have a heart attack and a heart problem, I'm going to go try, or somebody in my family, I'm going to try to find the best heart surgeon in the world, the best one. If I have a problem where my plumbing is not working, I'm going to try to find the best, most reliable plumber I can find. Sometimes I try to do it myself, and then, you know, I get in trouble. But if we have a serious problem, then we try to get the right person for the job. We have a business problem in town. I'm positive of that. I showed you the numbers. Everybody kind of agrees with me. We need to elect businessmen as selectmen. And we need to get them in there fast. And when they get in there, they need to set up the objectives, and they need to start running the town as a business. They got to establish and publish, so everybody knows what they are, high-level business priorities, 5 or 6 of them, whatever. And it doesn't matter what party they're from, as long as they're good businessmen and they were successful and they really understand how to run a business and they want to spend the time doing it. Most people don't. They're so busy running their businesses, they haven't got time to run the town. That's one of the problems. That one of the reasons I'm pitching in is because I'm retired and I have the time to do a lot of this research that other people don't have time to do. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to do this. Establish and publish the high-level business priorities. That's got to happen, and they got to be put out there for everybody to see, hung on the wall in the boardroom, and everybody's got to know what they are. And then they've got to provide consistent policy and direction to all the other managers in the town, so that they can work within these and come up with the low-level objectives so they can put a plan together that everybody is confident they can achieve. It doesn't do any good to put a plan together everybody says will fail and can't be done, then that won't work. So it has to be planned and managed. We need to provide consistent policy and direction. There's no doubt about that. We've got to be united as a team. When you're in a business, you're running a business, the last thing anybody wants to see, especially the shareholders, is fighting and arguing in the boardroom. You know, of course, you can't see it in most companies because they're not televised. But I'm not so sure the TV is good for our town. But I love the station, and I'm glad they have it. But everybody can see warts and all of every little argument that we have. But basically, there has to be consistent policy and direction. And when people get together, and I've seen Gödel and Einstein. Gödel was one of the best mathematicians we ever produced in Princeton, and he came from Germany, actually, from escapee from the war. And Einstein, of course, one of the best physicists. They had opposite sides on the issues in their life. Opposite sides. But they were at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton for many years together, and they talked and they disagreed with each other about very complex issues. Then they walked home at night and had dinner together or went out for a drink. And if you saw them walking, they looked a little eccentric, but you know, we have to put up with that when we run a business. We have to work together, and then we have to be able to get along with each other when we don't agree. That's very important, because we won't agree on most things. We have to delegate the authority, empower the people to get on with their job. If they don't have the confidence and they're not empowered to get on with their job, they're not going to be able to do a good job. It's impossible. And then we have to produce results. We have to be able to say every quarter, where do we stand against these objectives? Where do we stand at the end of the year? Did we get our 4% increase in revenue this year or not? Did we get our 5% or 5.5%? Is the quantum leap going along according to plan? Is there anything we can do to speed it up? Do it safely, make sure that it's done properly and goes through all the land use boards and everything. And when it happens and all the approvals are there and the guy starts digging the foundations, we all get together and help them be a success. We all work together and help our new share owners and our new stockholders be a success in the community, because what's a success for them is a success for us. What's a success for us is a success for them. It's very synergistic. So I'm saying we need to do this, okay? You don't have to do it. That's you go to the polls. I'm not telling you which party to vote for. I don't think anything. But I think that you need people who have this experience, and I'm going to give you some reasons why now you need that. You need this because They have the proven skills. They run a business successfully. It might be a smaller business than we have here, but it's the same principles are involved. You have to set objectives each year for in a profit and loss statement. You have to get people to work for you. They got to be the right people. You don't want to hire a bookkeeper to do a professional plumber's job, and you don't want to hire the professional plumber who's excellent at plumbing but doesn't know much about books to do the bookkeeping job. So what you got to do is you got to get people that have the proven skills. You might not like some of the people, you might not like their business, but I've had, again, wherever you go, and you get people that are trying to get to the moon, or they're trying to get a big banking system up, or they're trying to get a company turned around, or they're trying to grow a company fast around the world to compete with their competitors. There's going to be a lot of people in there that you can't get along with, and but they have skills that are absolutely essential for your growth and for your profitability and for your existence. And that's especially true. Now, I will tell you, and you know from your own experience here, that I like working in those kind of environments because everybody pulls together. When the flood comes, people pull together. I was in the Hartford Circus fire when I was about 5 or 6. I can never remember the age. People pulled together there to help save lives, and that's what happens in those kind of times. So what we have to do is try to get it to happen when we don't have a disaster. Try to get it to happen as a normal course of events. And if you see people that can't work as a team, then you shouldn't vote for them. I don't care which party they're in. You got to get people that can work together and that can get on with the plan. The businessmen all speak the same common language. They all speak business. They all know what a profit and loss is. They all know what objectives are. They all know how to meet objectives. They all know management by exception. They do it every day. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, Brian, we can give you a bid for putting on your extension, but we can't, if we hit a ledge, that's more, you know, we can't tell you how much that's going to cost and how long it's going to take. Or if we hit a spring underground, we can't tell you how much that's going to cost. But we're going to put this plan together, and this is what it'll cost, and this is how long it'll take. But if we hit one of those management by exception things, then we'll have to sit down at the table with you and talk about it. I personally understand that because I'm a businessman. But what I want to say to you is that businessmen speak that language. They understand all that. It doesn't matter whether they're a barber, it doesn't matter whether they're a plumber, it doesn't matter whether they're a carpenter, if they have their own business, they have to deal with exactly these same issues. I remember I was once, as a kid, worked in a Tony's Drive-In in Torrington. Tony, one of my mentors, and Tony Mishakowski, who did a lot for this area. He's Route 8, Mr. Route 8, and he's also Mr. Lottery to a certain extent. He's did a lot of good, and I learned a heck of a lot from him. But I used to have to deal with people I hated when they came in to the restaurant. I had no choice. I was working there, I was cooking, and I was a waiter. And you know, if I didn't like the people, I still had to be good to them, customer satisfaction. And if I wasn't good to them and I wasn't customer satisfaction, then I would have lost my job, certainly, because he relied on those customers to keep his business open and to be able to pay us. Right. These businessmen are also used to promoting positive teamwork towards common objectives. They have to take all these different people and make them work together towards a common objective, or they wouldn't succeed in business. So they're used to doing that. Right? And they're not going to create dissension. No, I'm not saying somebody won't make a mistake, won't get high-headed once in a while, but if that happens, which it does happen sometimes, then out you go for a drink after, or for a Coke or whatever, and you try to get along with the person on all the other 100 issues that you do agree with them on. So it's very important. The next point is they're used to a discipline required. There's a lot of discipline required. When you put these objectives down and you say you're going to try to go for these numbers over the next 10 years, a lot of discipline is necessary. Discipline in, hey, we can't have certain types of budgets. Hey, we got to have certain types of growth. And a lot of discipline is required in getting everybody there. Now, I always like to use, and I'll quite often do, use the example of an orchestra leader. You know, he comes in, especially a symphonic orchestra. He comes in, he's got these hundreds of people in the orchestra. They all play different instruments. They're all artists. A lot of them are temperamental. A lot of them think they're better than everybody else. Some are not confident at all. And he's got to take, by the time he performs in Carnegie Hall, he's got to whip them into shape. And he's got to get them all playing together. They got to be, they can't be dissonant, you know. They've got to be working. And then in the end, Who gets all the credit for it? The orchestra. The orchestra gets the credit. And the reason the orchestra gets credit is because the conductor wants the orchestra to get the credit. And that's how it has to happen in the town. The town workers there, the people that run all these organizations, they have to get the credit in the end. And the selectmen and the CEO have to kind of take a back seat on that. So it's give them credit, give credit, and that promotes people, and we'll talk more about it in future weeks. All right, the next is they will air their views in a positive, professional manner. And there'll be mistakes made. Some people won't like some of the way they handle it. They're all not perfect. Businessmen aren't perfect. They make a lot of mistakes too. But on average, they make less. Now, would I want one of these businessmen in the school system teaching mathematics to the kids? I don't know. I'd have to check and see what their background is and what their skills are and whether or not they have all the skills necessary to get into school and teach. It isn't just the mathematics they have to know. They have to know how to deal with the children. They have to know the sociology, the psychology, and how much learning somebody can do. Like even on these shows, I'm trying to permit as much each week as I think people can digest, and even then I feel it's probably too much. So they're used to that. They will certainly air their reviews, and in order to get people to air their reviews, you have to have an open. People often say to me, why don't anybody go down and air their reviews? And I say, well, because when they go down, they get the door shut in their face, or somebody, you know, they look at with a blank stare. But what has to happen is they have to be responsive to all this and encourage people to come, because that's managed by exception. If people won't come with their reviews until you made a mistake, then that's negative. It's not positive. You want people to come and tell you what you need to do to improve. So the next is they'll get to the point. You know, remember in the first, for those of you who've been around for 4 shows, and if you haven't, I got them on tape. You can see one. I talked about bicycle shedding. C. Northcote Parkinson wrote a book about one of the chapters was bicycle shedding, where you talk about for 8 hours about some subject about the bicycle shed. Well, businessmen can't afford to spend 8 hours. They can't spend 8 hours to talk to me now, even in the city hall, town hall, or the businessmen that are running for office. They got seconds and minutes to talk to me. So I got to speak to them. I got to speak to them in shorthand, real fast. And I can do that with them because they understand, I understand the language. It's like speaking French to Frenchman or German to German. Now, when I talk to people who don't understand the language, then I'm batting my head against a brick wall because we don't speak the same language, and I'm never going to be able. They don't have the same experience, they don't have the same background. I don't have their experience or their background, and they're probably on the other end of the normal distribution curve, and I'm on the other side. That's where these problems come in. So you want to get people who can work that way together and get to the point. And they will listen and seek advice. That's very important. Listening and seeking advice. Because again, management by exception absolutely relies on that. When you set objectives, you don't have all the information. So you better be on the lookout for it, and you better set the objectives and work. So that's that. Now I just want to put up quickly, because we're done now for this week. If anybody wants to talk more detail about any of these, I'll be happy to talk to you about them outside of this meeting. You can send me a letter. You can send me an email. I would hope he puts up my stuff on the screen again. Thank you. And I do have some papers I wrote, and I will write more papers. But letter to the selectmen, that green paper I told you, I made a condensed version so you don't have to read the whole thing unless you want to go to City Hall and get it. Winchester problem and proposed solution, which we talked about in the earlier shows. That's in red. This one's green. Possible 2008, 2009 property tax implications, yellow. Example, Winchester growth objective spreadsheets that I'm going to go over next week. I still have a little touching up to do on there. They're going to be in blue, and you can get a copy of those, and there's a lot of information in here as far as the objectives are concerned. Everybody will tell you all the reasons they can't be done, but that's what you need. You need to listen to those and then fix them. Go solve them. And then the 95% rule I mentioned last week for delegation is that, you know, you got to be able to, you can't run a smooth organization if you don't delegate, and you don't delegate 95% of the time. You got to set up an environment that allows that. We'll talk about that in future programs. So that's it. That's it for tonight. I thank my daughter for running the camera. She did a good job. My wife Joyce is here, just trying to see, you know, how the whole setup works. And I'm signing off for tonight. Next week, I do want to talk more about creating an environment for success. Some things I touched on tonight, but I'll add a lot more to it. Once you do have this organization for success, then you need to create the environment to be able to do things. And we got a lot of things we can talk about that. So I thank you. Now we'll get to the credits tonight. I want to just point out that I do have a very interesting person here as a guest today, and that's my old friend Ben Franklin. I learned from my 8th grade school teacher, Miss Barbara Klug, who was also a business person. She owned a farm with her family, and that penny saved is a penny earned. And I often mention that to people, that if you save a penny and then invest it at 6%, then over many, many years, you're going to have quite a bit of money. And I learned that from Ben Franklin and from Barbara Klug. I don't have her picture. I got it hidden away somewhere in my photo album. If I find it, I'll put it up. But we're thankful to her for that. Thank you very much.
Ready to go when you are.